Now, a college degree used to guarantee the chance for a better life. Sadly, these days, it seems to guarantee virtual debt slavery. Recent college graduates face an unemployment rate that's nearly double that of the rest of the population. Tuition rates, meanwhile, are skyrocketing. Since 1972, the cost of a college degree went up by nearly 3,400%. You heard me right. And student loan debt has now surpassed the $1 trillion mark. But with fewer jobs available to college grads, more and more students can't pay back their loans on time or at all. And unlike most forms of credit, you can't get rid of student debt in bankruptcy court. And now there's this. Unless Congress acts, the interest rate on federally subsidized Stafford loans is going to double this summer to 6.8%. And that can add as much as $11,000 additional dollars to a loan. So how do mountains of student debt affect the new graduates? And is the government investing enough in our intellectual infrastructure? For those answers and more, I want to bring in Kryn Johansson. She is the founder and the director of Education Matters Incorporated and is currently writing a book about student debt. Welcome to the program, Kryn.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get to the solutions, I want to see if you could sort of help our viewers understand the depth of the problem. Now, is the issue of student debt at crisis at this point?
It absolutely has. I'm not the only advocate who's been working on behalf of student debtors. I've been doing this for nearly 3 years. I'm actually currently in Eureka, California, doing an investigative piece with a family here. And I think one of the key things, I'm glad that you mentioned the intellectual infrastructure too, but also the emotional toll that this takes on individuals is quite tremendous. And to keep it in perspective, there are currently 36 million Americans with outstanding federal loans. That's a pretty sizable portion of the population, and these are people who are lawyers and doctors and engineers, and they are a dynamic part of the middle class. And yet, as you mentioned, these younger individuals who've been hit hard, very hard, and are having to turn to private loans more and more so, are graduating with mountains of debt. And as you indicated, we're now at the 1 trillion mark, if not, pretty close.
I'm just surprised that we don't really see as much discussion of this issue from our political leaders, from, even in the media. I mean, we have this news development, right? The federally subsidized loans rates are going to double. That affects, obviously, people who are going into college. But we're not really talking about the people who are already struggling with all this debt.
Yeah, you're right. Because the truth is we're in an election cycle right now, and to credit the Obama administration, he did eliminate FELP, the middlemen, if you will, with Sallie Mae and so forth. But there isn't a lot of talk, I think, about the current borrowers, those who are not in school or who are prospective students, because they're not affixed to institutions anymore. I hate to be cynical, but the money isn't being funneled into the institutions, and so they're sort of left hanging. And there's also sort of this issue of, well, it's your own fault. That's a lot of discussion that I see constantly on the internet and elsewhere, which gets away from the point of, what do we think of higher education as a society? Because at one point it used to be a public good and something that we believed that we should invest in. But to credit, some politicians.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you. I mean, what changed? You're right. Sure. It used to be a public good. We had the GI Bill. We had, massive sort of infrastructure helping people go to school. What changed?
I mean, that's a really great question. It's a complex one. I don't think that you can point to one thing, but my sense is that it's sort of been the devaluation of the concept of higher education, and the idea that it's now gauged in terms of market value. And I understand that to a degree, because you see all these articles, and I know that you have, as many others have, about what is the value of a degree. And I get it. And, this is part of the problem. But I think that if you think about it on a larger scale, culturally and socially, is it really just about the so-called market value of a degree? Because a lot of people say, oh, well, you shouldn't have gone into the humanities. Waste of your money, your fault.
Sorry, I think we're having some.
You should have gone into engineering, or let's say some other.
Sorry about that. Yeah, you are cutting out a little bit. I'm going to see if we can bring you back. Oh, there we go. You're back with us. All right, keep going.
So my point is, I'm not going to get into the arguments as to why we need people in the humanities. There are a lot of good arguments for that. But if you start pushing people into specific degrees, like I was saying, engineering, what's that going to do on the other end?
But what about humanities?
I
Forget about the humanities degree. What about humanity and our approach towards education in general? I mean, I have a hard time believing that, we can get bogged down in all these discussions about loans and interest rates and various firms. If the government wanted to embrace this as a value, as something that all people deserve to have access to, that could happen. It's just not because of political will, it would seem.
Yeah, and this is just yet another example of how partisan things are, regardless of the people on the Hill who want to improve the problem. It is, to me, you are absolutely right. What we don't seem to value education anymore. And you can just look at the budget for 2013. 3% of the budget is going to higher education. It's $68 billion. And you look at the defense industry and the Pentagon, and it's 58% of the budget. And I think that those numbers alone tell us a lot about what sort of value we supposedly have on higher education. And we're losing out. And if you want to look at it economically, we're losing out. Because China is definitely investing in higher education. So is the Middle East. I mean, they're going gangbusters, and meanwhile, all the people here graduating are drowning in student loan debt, and even worse, are moving home with mom and dad.
Well, bombs over books, it seems, and unfortunately, it's the country as a whole that really suffers. I really want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us. That was Corinne Johansson, the founder and the executive director of All Education Matters, Inc.